Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, I'm going to be talking about an interesting theory about what is motivating Kaiju number 8. Why does Kaiju number 8 seem so okay with and even intent on killing other Kaiju? And why does he seem to be protecting humans? How did he end up like this? What are his motivations, basically? And for a lot of today's video, I'm really grateful to user Blue Green Phoenix on Reddit. Blue Green Phoenix posted a very interesting analysis of what they thought Kaiju number 8's motivations were, or little guy, as they call it. And that really jived with certain of my own theories, and so we kind of springboarded off of that for a little discussion. Now, Blue Green Phoenix starts with the position that I articulated a few videos back, that Kaiju number 8 seems very childlike. There are distinct flags in the artwork, most notably when Kaiju number 8 shows up after Kafka is completely exhausted from the fight with director Shinomiya. Kaiju number 8 has very large eyes in proportion to his body, an elongated torso, and these are signs of a child, specifically a toddler-age child who's just beginning to really interact with the world, but is still very innocent. And there are other indicators throughout the series, mainly that when we first see Kaiju number 8, the little bug Kaiju before it crawls into Kafka's mouth, it looks very much like a fetus stage baby, or a very undeveloped, or a fish when it hatches out, something that is still very dependent on another living being. And then it forms the symbiotic relationship with Kafka, or parasitic relationship. Now, here's an interesting biology term. Parasite is a very broad term. It's simply one creature that depends on another for survival. So a predator, or an herbivore that eats other plants for survival is still technically a parasite under the broadest definition. And so basically anything that's not a plant that gets sunlight, or one of those creatures at the bottom of the sea that go off of minerals and thermal volcanic thermal energy, everything in the world is a parasite on some level. But parasite is kind of subdivided into predators that eat the entire species, herbivores that eat plants, and then actual parasites who do not kill the creature that they are relying on for nutrients. So then that is subdivided into two categories, parasite and symbiote. A symbiote gives back. This is a symbiotic relationship. Think of the little boxing crab, the one that gets sea anemones and puts it on its claws. The sea anemone gets the protection of the crab and that protects it from getting eaten. The crab gets the protection of the anemones that protects it from enemies. And so that's a classic example of a symbiotic relationship. Now, usually when one creature crawls inside another creature's body, it's usually a parasitic relationship because the creature that's being the host doesn't usually get a benefit. But in the relationship between Kafka and Kaiju number 8, Kafka does get a distinct benefit. Kaiju number 8 provides him with protection from larger, meaner Kaiju. And Kaiju number 8 does appear to be getting some benefit from this relationship, a host to live in, and probably food and nutrients from Kafka's body. So this is much more of a symbiotic relationship. Now, that's a side tangent, but getting back to the main point, what Blue Green Phoenix brought up, why does this childlike symbiote seem to hate Kaiju so much? Why does it react so negatively to Kaiju that Kafka can feel it in his bones when a Daikaiju appears? And why does little guy seem so dedicated to protecting humans? Well, if you look at the story, at what happens from the little guy's perspective, all of this behavior does kind of make sense. The first thing that Blue Green Phoenix points out is that the little guy does not seem to have a super negative reaction to Daikaiju until after Kafka's fight with Kaiju number 9. So let's just step back and take a look at the story as it unfolds from Kaiju number 8's perspective, from the little guy's perspective. We still remembering we still don't know where he came from. So we see Kaiju number 8 show up. Kafka's in the hospital. He's recovering. He's injured. He's in there with Reno. Now, Kaiju number 8 shows up, and as Blue Green Phoenix points out, his first reaction to Kafka isn't spoken words, or Reno would have heard it. But the words were, "I found you." But these are kind of surrounded by those wavy lines that usually indicate a psychic communication, meaning this could have been very emotional. And in the world, there are many, many creatures that when they find their mother experience a very strong emotion, even though they have no other memories, just a genetic impulse to find a safe place. The biggest example, the most relevant example, is kangaroos. Kangaroos are born in litters just like anything else, but they're very, very underdeveloped. In fact, if you look at a kangaroo, it actually looks a lot like, minus the wings, what the little guy looks like before he crawls into Kafka's mouth. So the kangaroo is born, and then it has to crawl many, many times its body length up its mother's stomach. She's trying to help it by, she slicks down the fur. She tries to make it easy as possible, but that baby kangaroo, it's just like a pink little jelly bean with underdeveloped front limbs, no hind limbs, no and just a rudimentary tail. It's blind. It has to crawl up her stomach to find the pouch where it can latch on, and it attaches onto the nipple to get milk, to food to sustain it until it continues growing. So kangaroos are different from most other mammals in that aspect. Their babies are not born even as developed as a mouse. So this kaiju number 8, the theory that Blue Green Phoenix and I are exploring here it's basically, what if the kaiju number 8, or the little guy, was basically a baby kangaroo, born without any previous experience, just a genetic impulse to find that safe place where it can find its host mother, grow, and change. And it found Kafka. Now, why it chose Kafka, how it chose Kafka, Blue Green Phoenix doesn't really go into that because that's not the main point. But here's one theory. Just like that kangaroo, it was predetermined to find a safe space, and it has just enough senses to recognize what its genes are telling it's a safe space. And given that it seems to have some sort of psychic ability, it probably has something to do with emotions. And right at the moment that it chose Kafka, Kafka was experiencing both determination and expressing strength of character, which is important if you're looking for a host. You want something that's strong enough to protect you. But also, Kafka was experiencing love and affection, that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling that he was getting from both his interactions with Reno, because Reno had just expressed, that sort of brotherly affection for Kafka. And Kafka was just renewing and reviving his brotherly love for Mina, that pledge they had made together. So Kafka, in this moment, he is radiating both determination, strength, moral strength, physical strength, and a love and compassion. So at this point, the little guy has found his host, and so he crawls into Kafka's mouth. Now, let's look as this goes on. Like Blue Green Phoenix suggested, I'm only going to really reference the parts where either Kafka has just transformed or is actively transformed, because those are the only times we know when Kaiju, the little guy, seems to be able to see what's going on around him. We do not know for sure that the little guy is aware of anything that's going on with Kafka when Kafka is not actively transformed, although there are hints that it does. But anyway, so little guy's first interactions. He climbs in and he transforms Kafka's body for the first time. And Kafka just freaks out and he panics. But there's Reno there right beside him. And Reno pretty much immediately begins expressing love and concern for Kafka. That strong brotherly love that has already sprung up between them in a tiny form and continues to go throughout the series. Reno's very first interaction with Kaiju number 8, Kafka, is because he pulls back the curtains and expresses concern for Kafka's well-being. Then, as soon as Reno gets over his initial freak out, Kafka is panicking. So, Kaiju number 8, the little guy, is experiencing these strong, intense, panicking fear emotions, and the only one there talking him through it, taking care of him, is Reno. Reno expresses concern for him. Reno gets him out of the hospital. Reno tries to get him to go to safety. Of course, then Kafka, Kaiju number 8, senses the approaching Yoju and turns around and goes to make sure nobody gets hurt. So, the very first emotion that isn't fear, revulsion, or horror that Kaiju number 8 experiences is Kafka is whatever reaction Kafka is having to the brotherly love from Reno, and then B, Kafka's intense desire to protect people that completely overwhelms the fear. And if you've ever been really afraid of anything, and then you've had a duty placed in front of you, you know that having that duty placed in front of you, a duty that you recognize and follow through, it gets rid of the fear, pushes it to the back burner. The thing that you're afraid of is still there, but it doesn't matter because you've got your duty to focus on. So Kafka then goes and rescues the little girl. Then we have a very, very interesting point, which I discussed with Blue-Green Phoenix. The Kaiju number 8 has experienced the reaction emotions to Reno's brotherly love, but still the main emotion that he's been experiencing up to this point has been fear and panic. Then Kafka expresses his sense of duty, goes and punches the kaiju. Now the first punch is just Kafka pulling up, it looks like kind of like an uppercut to punch away the kaiju, and it's not really effective. Then we see for the first time, the light inside of the Kaiju number 8's eyes expands, and his body starts to crackle with energy, and you get a good look at those shoulder mouths. Now, later on, we learn that this is the sign that the actual Kaiju number 8, the little guy, is starting to express and take control of the body, because that's what happens when Kaiju number 8 unquestionably takes full control of the body during the fight with Commander Shinomiya. And so, here's the first time that Kaiju number 8 is expressing control of the shared body. Now, it's not full control like we see in chapter 36, but it's like Kaiju number 8 is offering a suggestion. And this is when Kafka, just out of the blue, knows how to give a super punch and tear apart the Yoju. Now, here's another interesting thing. At this point, Reno says something that sends up a flag as being something kind of weird. At the time, I thought it was just a translation issue, but Reno says that is definitely not something you should use on a human. Now, why would Reno say something that out of left field? Not that's powerful, not that's incredibly dangerous, that's not something you should use on a human. Keep that in mind. We'll circle back to this later. But remember, Reno is the one who's been consistently showing care and concern for Kafka and therefore for Little Guy. And Little Guy probably doesn't differentiate between himself and Kafka at this point. Then Kafka turns around and he sees the little girl is still afraid, and Kafka does his Kafka thing, makes the girl feel comfortable, promises to leave. And the little girl gathers up her courage and expresses her love and gratitude for Kaiju number 8 Kafka for rescuing her. And this is the first truly good emotion, not just a negation of bad emotion, that the little guy feels since he's been a symbiote with Kafka. Everything up to this point has been fear or revulsion. But when that little girl thanks Kafka, it floods him with the intense, wholesome satisfaction that you get when a child thanks you. And that emotion connects to Kafka's super strong, nostalgic love for Mina and their childhood promise. So you have this little kaiju. It's just punched and pulverized another kaiju. And after it does that, it gets a massive amount of positive emotional feedback that goes down to the very core of what motivates humans on a very genetic level, the preservation of the young and the bonds that we share with our particular family group as children. And so this little kaiju, who probably came, if the indicators we're looking at are real, from almost a blank state, baby kangaroo state, its very first super positive emotion comes after it punches a kaiju. So right there, we have a really powerful motivation for it to think positively of punching kaiju and protecting humans. Then you have the developing relationship between Reno and Kafka. Now I want to circle back to chapter 1 for this one. Remember, the title of this is Eat, Punch, Love. Now, we've already looked at punch, so let's go look back and eat. The very first introduction to our main character, he is eating. And what is he eating? He's on his lunch break. He is very clearly eating a very unhealthy store-bought hamburger. Now, a hamburger in Japanese manga is sort of a catch-all for cheap, unhealthy junk food. Later on in Kafka's apartment, he has no cooking utensils, pretty much. Even though he has a nice large apartment and could afford to have a kitchen, he has nothing except an electronic kettle to boil water, and stacks of instant noodles. Now, in manga, instant noodles and hamburgers share the kind of dubious honor of being considered the shorthand for an unhealthy eating lifestyle. And we know that Kafka's been gaining weight in his 30s. He was unsatisfied with his body, but this is his lifestyle. Also back in chapter 1, we see Reno's habits, and Reno, being a young upcoming guy who still has his hopes and dreams, is taking really good care of his body. He has an obviously handmade bento box for lunch. We know it's handmade because it's got that handkerchief wrapped around it. And very importantly, he has a twist-off cap bottle of tea. So Reno clearly hand makes his own lunches, and he puts a lot of thought and effort into it. And then again, the emphasis on food and nutrition is reemphasized when Kafka's first kind of act of compassion towards Reno is handing over his own drink, which is a store-bought packet of nutrient. One translation said juice, one translation said super mega vitamins. So basically, this is Kafka's one concession to health here. So you have that scene. Then at the beginning of chapter 3, you have the scene where Reno gets the letters that says that they passed the exam, and he runs over immediately to tell Kafka, full of excitement. And you see Kafka eating his breakfast brunch on top of the dead kaiju. Now, very interesting, Kafka is transformed in this scene, and it wasn't something he did deliberately. He said it just slipped out. Now, assuming that Kaiju number 8 has conscious control, it means that Kaiju number 8 slipped out and took control of the body for a little bit. Why? Again, Kafka was eating. And you have the main positive relationship in Kaiju number 8's life, and the little guy's life, is Reno. Now, very interestingly, look at what Kafka is eating. It's a massive bento box full of various rice and vegetables. Now, that is not the kind of thing that we've seen Kafka normally eat up to this point. He just goes to the store, buys a hamburger, buys a pre-made packet of juice. But today, he not only has a massive pre-made bento box, and usually bought bento boxes are much smaller than this. They don't have as much food, they don't have as many vegetables, they're mostly rice. They're mass-produced, they're cheap. This is clearly a handmade bento box. And he has a twist-off cap bottle of tea with the bento box. Given their relationship at this point, it's no stretch to assume that Reno has taken over feeding Kafka to keep him healthy, to help him prepare for the test. And then this delicious food could have been what lured out the little guy. And the reason that Kafka transformed is that the little guy wanted to taste Reno's food. And so the little guy now sees Reno as a source of not only love and affection, but food. So again, you have this kind of, unbeknownst to everyone in the story, this relationship building between the little guy and Reno, as well as the relationship building between Kafka and Reno. Then Reno expresses his concern for Kafka, the host who is keeping the little guy alive, and as far as the little guy knows, his concern for the little guy by roughhousing and with Kafka and telling him to stop transforming. And it could be that the lack of accidental transformations after this was the little guy listening to Reno, as Blue Green Phoenix points out. Then as the relationship goes on, you just consistently see Reno expressing his concern for Kafka and trying to keep Kafka alive. And all of these happen immediately after Kafka does some form of transformation. And then, so you have this relationship developing not only between Kafka and Reno, but the little guy and Reno. So the little guy, the little kaiju number 8, who came in as in this baby kangaroo state, is constantly learning that A, Reno is a friend, B, he's had a constant example of good, wholesome brotherly love, showing him to take care of humans, and C, he's got one major incident of input that says punching other kaiju and killing them is how you take care of humans. Then you have the interactions between Kikoru and Kafka. And again, you have someone who Kafka's eyes would have been on par with the little girl that he rescued. So there's a good connection between Kikoru and that girl child that they rescued at the beginning of the series. So they go out, they have a fight, and then you get another transformation scene that's strongly implied after Kafka gets injured by the kaiju. And again, you have Kafka transforming because remember, after the battle, they said that Kafka didn't have any major injuries. But immediately after Kafka had been whacked by that kaiju, you see Hoshina, Vice Captain Hoshina, says your vitals are abnormal, you may have internal injuries. He didn't, but his vitals were still reading as abnormal. This means to me that the little guy partially transformed Kafka. Now that's very interesting. He didn't fully transform him because Reno has taught him not to. He just transformed everything that couldn't be seen so that Kafka could survive the blow from the kaiju. And so Kafka from this point on is partially transformed. And again, during the rest of the scene, you see Reno expressing that brotherly love, taking care of Kafka, sacrificing his own chance on the defense force to keep Kafka going so they can go together. Then you have Kafka rescuing Shinomiya. And of course, Kafka's going to get that dopamine hit from doing something selfless and taking care of cute little Kikoru. And of course, the little guy's going to be experiencing that as well. Then Kafka transforms and punches the snot out of the Hanju and then the Yoju. And again, Kafka is going to be happy about that, which will give Kaiju little guy a dopamine hit. And then Reno, the caretaker, shows up and expresses his concern over Kafka, and then they all kind of retreat. And then, as they're recovering in the hospital, you have Kafka and Reno being brotherly to each other, and you get those really strong dopamine hits of one when Mina shows up to thank them, and when Kafka expresses his determination to continue on the defense force. So you have the entire first 4 chapters are basically showing that the situation has conditioned Kaiju number 8 to have positive associations with protecting humans and positive associations with punching the snot out of Kaiju. But up till this point, Kaiju number 8 has not really expressed any strong negative reaction to Kaiju until you have the situations in chapter 17 to 19 when Kaiju number 8 shows up to rescue Reno and Haru from Kaiju number 9. Now, up till this point, Reno has been the caregiver, the bringer of food, the caretaker for basically the mom friend for Kafka, and therefore for Kaiju number 8. Then, in this scene where Kaiju number 8 shows up and sees that Reno has been pulverized by Kaiju number 9. Kaiju number 9 is actively just torturing Reno at this point to get Reno down to a manageable specimen. And remember, Kafka has also bonded with Aiharu at this point, and the Kaiju number 9 is about to kill Aiharu. Now, when Kafka shows up, and Kaiju number 8 shows up in his Kaiju number 8 form, you get that really, really intense panel near the middle of chapter 17, where you see Kaiju number 9's face and Kaiju number 8's face popping up directly behind him. Now, note the speech balloons. They're surrounded by that black brush stroking, which indicates that the Kaiju is in control of the body. Now, what Blue-Green Phoenix here suggests is that Kaiju number 8, or the little guy, he is off kind of showing up. He's not taking control of the body, but he's offering suggestions and power to Kafka in dealing with this, because Kafka is filled with rage at Kaiju number 9 for torturing Reno and Aiharu. And the little guy, this is going to be the first time that he's experienced this super intense rage, because in the previous fights, Kafka was just responding. He didn't have any real emotional connection to fuel that. And if you look at Kaiju number 8's eyes, they are starting to expand and glow. So again, indications that the little guy is either taking a little bit of control or making suggestions, but he's definitely involved in this. Then Kafka bends down to take care of Reno and pick him up. And interestingly enough, he seems entirely focused on Reno. He almost seems to be ignoring Aiharu, which is something that kind of seems weird to me at first. He probably was going to take care of Aiharu as well, and Reno is the one in the worst shape, but Reno is the one that Kafka just picks up and gently cradles in his arms. So again, that might be the impulse of the child mind in his driving his actions to some degree. But then you get, again, Kafka is filled with rage, and he punches the snot out of Kaiju number 9. Now, going off this premise, the little guy's going to be very down with this. Reno is the mom friend. Reno's the provider of food, the caregiver. And Kaiju number 9 has hurt Reno terribly, filling their shared body, with this rage and fury. And so the little guy at this point is totally down for just beating down Kaiju number 9, destroying him. And that's what we see happen. Then, again, the little guy is just given this example of selfless self-sacrifice where he jumps in between the bullets and these 2 random defense members. And interestingly enough, that had to be Kaiju number 8. That had to be the little guy. That really couldn't have been Kafka, at least not a conscious decision on Kafka's part. Maybe it was Kafka's impulse, but any thinking, any planning had to be done by the little guy at this point, because we've seen that Kaiju number 9's finger bullets do go as fast as real bullets. So from the moment that Kaiju number 8 saw exactly what Kaiju number 9 was doing, he had to realize that who Kaiju number 9 was aiming at. He had to come up with an action plan to keep them from getting killed, and he had to take action to keep them from getting killed. There wasn't enough time for Kafka to have done that consciously. He may have felt the impulse to save them, but he couldn't have possibly been thinking that quick. So that action of saving not Reno, the caregiver, but those 2 random Defense Force members had to have been all Kaiju number 8 or the little guy. So at this point, we have really good evidence that the little guy is on the side of not just killing Kaiju, but protecting humanity. So I'm going to have to end the video here. It's already past 25 minutes long, and I've got some other things to do, but I'm definitely going to continue this. So this is the first part of Eat, Punch, Love. And so we've talked about Eat, how Reno was the source of food and an incredibly strong source of positive emotional reinforcement for the little guy. And we've talked about Punch, why the little guy would have such a strong impulse to attack Kaiju, and why after the battle with Kaiju number 9, he would have such a strong negative reaction to Die Kaiju. Now, we're going to get to Love in the next video, but that's it for now. So, if you want something to read while you're in between waiting for chapters for Kaiju number 8 to come out, check out my book in the links below the video. Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, A Book of Human Absurdity, or Dying Embers, Dragons, Aliens, and Things That Go Boom in the Night. Also, I have some really good news. My audiobook recording is coming along nicely. It's just me reading the chapters straight. There's no script. So it's not an audio drama, it's just an audio narration. I hope you guys enjoy that when it comes out. It will be available on all of the main audiobook platforms, including Audible. So let's look forward to that, and peace out, my wonderful viewers.
The book from author Betty Adams, Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, is a humorous look at human behavior through the eyes of aliens. This book is arranged in separate reports or essays, documenting the experiences with humanity through the lens of the aliens who have to interact with them. This anthology of short stories and vignettes from alien points of view highlights some of humanity's quirks we can all relate to. Author Betty Adams captures how strange and interesting humans can really be. This is a fun collection of stories you will really get a kick out of. Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, from author Betty Adams. Order your copy right now on Amazon.